Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Pronk from Aussie Frontline, and welcome to this overview video of our Thriving in Transition online course. So when you click on the course, it'll come up with this course homepage, and when you scroll through there, you can see the different sections. We've got the introduction, then we've got the key concepts, a series of videos there, and then we move into this Thriving in Transition series of videos. And so the course is roughly 2.25 hours total in content, and it's very deliberately designed to be done in a modular fashion. So it's chunked down into these different areas and different videos. The video durations are somewhere between 8 and just under 20 minutes. And so it's designed so that you can access this information, you can watch it in modules, small bits at a time, in between work or just fitting it in around your schedule, and also so you can easily revisit key parts. So if you wanted to re-watch it, you don't have to go back through the whole 2.5 hours to find where you wanted to see. You can just click on that video. So in the introduction, we just set the scene for the transition process, the fact that for most people coming out of the military or a first responder organisation, transition is a very stressful time, and it can leave people vulnerable to mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and the like. We know that it's a period of time where sadly, the risk of suicide goes up for transitioning members, and this course is all about demystifying that process, talking to the key psychological factors that are at play when we transition from these high intensity, high investment, but often very professionally rewarding careers and try and start again as a civilian if you're coming out of the military, or in the broader population if you're coming out of another civilian first response organisation. So the intro sets the scene and starts to talk to not only my own personal experience, but the broader experience of most transitioning military members and first responders. So once we've done that introduction, we move into these key concepts. And the first is just once more reiterating that you may not see the challenge of transition coming as you're approaching this transition period. Certainly, I didn't see it coming. I was looking forward to all the positives of getting out of the military, and that kind of just masked all of these considerations that I should have had around the psychological challenge of transitioning. So this, you may not see the cliff coming video, is just designed to elaborate on that and start to highlight some of these key psychological factors that are at play during transition that people should be thinking about to better prepare themselves for the transition process. The next video uses Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or Maslow's triangle, Maslow's pyramid. People might have heard of this, but just to frame the discussion around why it can be so challenging to transition. So Maslow's hierarchy looks at a framework of human motivation. The basic needs, so the foundations of the pyramid, are all your things like food, water, warmth, rest, all this kind of stuff that keeps us alive as humans. But what Maslow proposed really optimizes us as humans is the psychological needs. So our needs to feel like we are contributing to something, like we have some self-esteem, like we are professionally developing and evolving, moving forward with our skills, often our professional skills in our work role, and also to feel part of a tribe, so to be a valued member of a group. And often that happens very well in organisations like the military or first response organisations. You get this real tribal sense of affiliation. You feel part of that team. You draw a lot of your self-worth, your self-esteem from your professional role. And at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he uses the term self-actualization, which is being the best version of yourself that you can be. So doing what you feel you were put on this planet to do. And a lot of people experience that in these military or first responder roles. And it's important to understand that can be lost in transition. So that feeling of self-actualization and a lot of those psychological needs that really optimize us as humans and make us feel good about ourselves and motivate us can be lost in transition. So an awareness of that is important, and it starts to form the roadmap back to self-actualization once you've transitioned out of your former role. So you need to know you're likely to take a hit. This is the psychology that underpins it and also starts the process of rebuilding it. The next video looks at identity. So our personal identity, how we see ourselves, how we put ourselves out there in the world is our identity. And if you've spent a career as a military member or first responder, you will identify as that role. That job will be a big part of your individual identity. And that can get lost, or it does get lost, when you transition out of those roles. You lose that big chunk of your identity, and it throws you into what's known as an identity crisis. You no longer have that identity of your old work role, and you need to start rebuilding a new personal identity. So once again, an awareness of that, critically important. The next video looks at our group identity. So while we have this personal identity made up of a bunch of different factors, a big part of our identity also comes from the groups that we are associated with. And so in the context of a military member first responder, a lot of your social identity is formed by these group affiliations being part of that work tribe. And so your personal identity gets thrown into a state of identity crisis, and part of that is also fueled by this loss of group identity when you transition out. So once again, awareness of that, critically important, and it does start to form the framework as to how to rebuild a positive individual identity and group identity post-transition. So the psychology behind it is explained in those videos. The fifth video in this initial section just talks about the flow state. So flow state activities are activities that you can get really engaged in. You can get almost lost in them. You can lose track of time. You're really involved and engaged. And these are fantastic things to have in your life. And what a lot of people who have come out of high intensity roles realize is that a lot of these flow states were accessed through their work role. So they were filling this need, this cathartic process of tapping into flow in their work role, be that through training or through the operational requirements of their role, and that can get lost. And it's very important to have these flow states in our life. So in this video, we look at what your flow states were in the work environment, what ones you might lose access to when you transition out, and then positive ways that you can rebuild flow into your life post-transition. The final video in this first section talks about purpose. And now, first responders, military members generally have a huge sense of purpose. It's built into the role. It's this role of service. It's this role of contributing to something more than yourself. This drives this purpose that's fairly strong in organizations like military and first response, and once again can get lost when you transition out. So it's important to look for building new purpose in your life. What can you be doing to move towards, to feel this sense of contribution to a greater good and to drive you and motivate you in life post-transition? So that first block of courses really sets the scene around the psychology of transition and these key psychological factors at play during the transition process that can make it extremely unsettling and can leave people vulnerable to the effects of mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress from potentially accumulated traumas throughout their career that haven't been properly processed. So the first block sets the scene, and then in the next block of videos titled Thriving in Transition, we start to take a bit of a deeper dive into some of the tools to be able to rebuild yourself into a self-actualized version of yourself post-transition. So first video here looks at self-esteem. How do we rebuild self-esteem after transition? And it recognizes the fact that many military members, first responders, have got great self-esteem, but it's what's known as contingent self-esteem. It's all reliant on them wearing the uniform or doing the job. It's contingent on that. And so when you transition out and you're no longer doing those functions that you derived your self-esteem from, you can lose that self-esteem. So we need to rebuild that. The next video in the Thriving in Transition section looks at our values. And now values are something that we all have. We'll inherently know what our values are. They're things that are important to us, that we feel are worth upholding and striving towards. They do form part of our individual identity, group identity, and often organisations such as military first response will have a really strong set of positive values that have served individuals well throughout their career. And a lot of those are great to transition with, things like the sense of service, this integrity, respect, courage, leadership. All of these are fantastic values to take with you in your life post-transition. But there's a couple of values in there that you may not recognize don't serve you well post-transition. So this video looks at just taking a bit of a better look at your individual values, mapping out your values if you haven't done that before, looking at which of them are going to be good ones to uphold and take with you in post-transition life, others that you might need to soften or let go of, ones that served you well during your former role but may not align well with your life post-transition, and equally looking at what are the values that you may not have developed during your previous role and might serve you well post-transition. So having a bit of a look at values and how they might need to be reviewed and adjusted to be the best set of values to move forward post-transition. Next video looks at the pace of life. Now we know that the people in roles such as military and first response have got upregulated stress response systems because of their roles. And this is quite interesting. It doesn't matter what you do within one of these organizations. We know that if you are a part of the military or a part of a first responder organization, that as a generalization, you are going to have an upregulated stress response system just by virtue of being part of those organizations. And so this is kind of akin to like a car engine just revving away at 4,000 or 5,000 revs the whole time. It upregulates us, it keeps us pepped up, ready to go, alert, vigilant on the job when we're in those environments, but that over time upregulates your chronic stress response system, and that can lead to this feeling of a real profound slowing of the pace of life when you transition out, that can lead to feelings of dissatisfaction, feelings of boredom, being really unsettled in that transition period, feeling like you should be doing more. Your body's used to that heightened stress state, and when there's no stimulus to justify being in that stress state, leaves you feeling quite anxious and agitated. So an awareness of that and some strategies not only to recognize it, but how to best deal with that upregulated stress response, be it to start to find productive ways to stimulate yourself, but equally to just an awareness of it, to give yourself time to allow that stress response system to wind back down in your life post-transition is a healthy way to approach that. As we start to move towards the end of the course, we start to look at support networks. And one of the key hallmarks of any first responder or military organization is you work in teams. So different people will have different specialist skills, and together you can approach your task with confidence and solve very complex problems in those environments. Yet when we transition out, a lot of people don't think to rebuild a team to be able to help them through that transition process. So the reality is that most individuals coming out of the military or first responder roles don't have all the tools themselves to be able to negotiate the process. You need other key team members to be able to help you negotiate that transition process and then thrive post-transition. So in this video, we talk about what those team members are, who they are, and family and friends is one group, mental health professionals, which we often tend to shy away from when we're during our service. We tend to shy away from the psychologists, the counsellors. We know the studies tell us over and over that there's a real suspicion of mental health professionals. There's concerns about what engaging with a psychologist might mean for our careers when you're in the military first response, for our promotional opportunities, these kind of things. But in transition, it's a great time to reassess this and realize that groups like mental health professionals, the psychologists, the counselors, the doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, these group of people have these specialist skills and evidence-based tools to help us process everything that's happened during our career, deal with the stress of transition, and then move forward in a productive fashion. Equally, family and friends can provide some real support there, but it's about how you tap into these different support structures and knowing what you can get from these different support groups to help you move forward in transition and thrive. Then the very last video in this section talks about post-traumatic growth. So it's likely that you have experienced trauma within your professional role. It's just part of the job, no matter what you've done in the military or first responder organisation, you will have accumulated some degree of traumatic exposures. Now, these might be direct exposures, you were involved in these critical incidents. They might be what's known as vicarious traumas or secondary traumatic stress. You weren't directly involved, but you were aware of these things happening and learning about them, which drives a very real stress response in our bodies, almost the same as direct exposure, and can lead to post-traumatic stress, even though you weren't directly involved in the situation. And then equally, there's a concept called moral injury. So often these are acts of omission, things you didn't do or couldn't do, often because of resource constraints. You just simply couldn't get to a job to help out, and then there's a bad outcome and you're left with this guilt, this moral injury from something you didn't do, often because you couldn't do it. And so this combination of traumas from direct exposure, vicarious or secondary exposure, and then moral injury can really catch up with people during the transition process. So having some tools and strategies and having the right team in your corner to be able to process this information is a fantastic thing to do during the transition process, but also an awareness that trauma doesn't necessarily lead to negative outcomes. It can actually lead to growth. So in this final video of the course, we talk about post-traumatic growth, what that is, and how you can find the silver lining, if you like, to the dark clouds of these traumas, focus in on the positive aspects of some of your experiences and use them to drive growth moving forward after your career in the military or first response. And so we wrap the course up with a conclusion that just summates everything there, and that's the end of the course. In some of these components here, we've got some downloadable assets that you can download PDF files. So here we've got these worksheet, for instance, in the values video, we've got a values worksheet, and so they're just designed to be there as adjuncts if you want to print it out and then scribble on that, do a bit of extra work there to be able to, in this instance, define your values and then group them into the ones that served you well during your period of service but may not serve you well in civilian life or life after your first response service. Look at ones that do continue to serve you well and how you can reinforce them, and then ones that might need to develop when you transition out to be the best version of yourself, self-actualized in transition. So that's the course. Look, thank you for watching this video. I hope you get a lot out of this course, and if you're watching this video, then that tells me you are a former military member or about to transition out of the military, you're a former first responder or about to transition out of there, or you're involved in this community. And so I'd just like to thank you personally and on behalf of Aussie Frontline for your service to your country and your community. Cheers.